Once upon a time in the Garden of Eden, it was a beautiful sunny day. Birds sang, butterflies fluttered, and at the periphery a stream gently babbled over the stones. Beautiful flowering and fruit trees stood straight. There were a lot of flowers. In the morning, Eve wandered alone while Adam explored another part of the garden. A voice brought her out of her thoughts. "Hi, beauty. Beautiful morning. As always, isn't it?" The snake hissed. "Oh yeah, it is very beautiful here. I really like it here. I hope we never have to leave," she told him. "Hey, have you ever tried this?" asked the snake, handing her a beautiful apple. "No, we are not allowed to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. God said we can eat the fruit of any other tree, but not this one," she said. "But not only is it very tasty, but if you eat it, you will know as much as God. In fact, you will practically become a god yourself. God is not here now, and he will never know. What could it harm?" It was a beautiful sunny Saturday morning. Kenny Richardson still had 2 sections of his yard left to finish. He was sweating in his t-shirt, but he was smiling widely. He loved the look of his lush, dark green lawn, especially after it was mowed. Although he could have easily afforded a lawn tractor, he much preferred the level surface provided by a non-propelled lawnmower. He winced when he saw an Apex courier truck pull up to his side. His wife, Callie, is out grocery shopping, which means he'll have to take a long break. From cutting his hair to sign for a package or envelope the courier has delivered. He hated to stop mowing before finishing. "Man, that's some impressive grass you have," the delivery guy said as Kenny walked up to him. "Yes, all premium blue. None of this mixture of crap that everyone is pushing. I don't mind the rye part, but I hate the fine fescue." "Fescue is creeping weeds, damn cousin," Kenny said. "What do you have here for me?" "Well, actually it's for your wife, but you can sign if you show me your ID," the courier said. Kenny pulled out his driver's license from the pocket of his shorts. The courier took a photo of him, thanked him, and handed Kenny an envelope. Kenny looked through it and carried it into the house without opening it, after which he returned outside and finished mowing just as his wife drove up to the house. "I'll bring the packages. There's an envelope for you on the table that some fancy courier delivered a few minutes ago," Kenny said. Kenny took 4 steps from the car to the kitchen table, carrying groceries into the house. As he put down the last package, he found his wife of 35 years, seated on the living room sofa, sobbing quietly as she looked at several pieces of paper. "Someone died, baby?" Kenny asked. Callie looked up from her papers and tried to speak, but no sound came out of her mouth. Kenny hadn't seen such an expression on her face since she learned of her mother's death several years ago. He sat down next to her on the sofa, wrapped his arms around her body, and hugged her tightly. They sat in this position for several minutes until Callie's tears finally subsided. "Ian Ross died yesterday," Callie whispered barely audibly. Kenny knew his wife was close to her former boss, but he was surprised by the extent of her grief. They had worked closely together for about 10 years, but had not seen each other since. Kenny and Callie moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, from Phoenix, Arizona, about 10 years ago. Kenny knew he probably wasn't the most sensitive person in the world, but this level of grief for his former employer seemed excessive. Kenny quickly remembered how Callie worked for Ian. She always considered him an impeccable gentleman and a wonderful mentor. He remembered that a couple of years before they moved, she worried about him after the death of his longtime wife, but he had apparently gotten over his grief and illness by the time Kenny and his wife moved in. "When Kenny got his big promotion, I need to go back to Phoenix for a funeral. It will be in 3 days," Callie said. "Do you need to go to the funeral?" Kenny asked. "Necessary." Callie looked straight into her husband's eyes. They had been together long enough for him to see the real anger in them. "Yes, I need to go," she muttered. "Well, that means we need to go," Kenny said. "If it's so important to you, then it's our business." If Kenny expected his wife to be happy about his announcement of her support, he was mistaken. She continued to stare at him. "You don't need to come with me. I'm already a big girl. I've traveled alone before," she said. "Even one went to Phoenix to visit Joni. I know that you don't need me to go with you." "I just want to go with you," Kenny said. "As you say," she muttered. So you received notification of your old boss's death by courier the day after it happened. Isn't this too unusual? Kenny asked. He did not receive an answer to this question. I'm really worried about Ian, Callie told the women gathered around the table at the upscale Italian restaurant, Mastrioni's. 3 months have passed, and he is still worried about Anna's death. I understand that grief has no schedule, but it is even starting to take its toll on the company. He's made some bad decisions lately that I don't think he would have made in the past. Callie served as vice president of reinsurance at Phoenix General Insurance. Ian was the CEO of the company. Callie worked at the company for 22 years, gradually moving up the career ladder. For the past few years, she has been Ian's lifesaver in the reinsurance department. Maybe it's time for you to get in touch with your boss on a more personal level, chuckled Joni Caputo, Ian Ross' personal administrator. He was always partial to you. And it's not like you've never noticed him looking up your skirt before. All four women at the table giggled like 15-year-olds. They all admired their boss. And they all had to admit that he was handsome and still in shape for his 60 years. So we put you in the role of personal sacrifice for the collective good. Chandra Ferguson announced. Undo the extra button on your blouse. Shorten your skirts and dresses a couple more inches. Bend over a little more than usual. And maybe lean your big tits against his hand from time to time. Yes, and we will cover for you in front of other employees to reduce suspicion to a minimum, added the fourth woman, Elvira Anderson. At the end of the day, this is an act of compassion. And we don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. All four clinked glasses and returned to their food. A week later, Callie invited Ian to dinner for the first time. The blouse was undone one, more buttoned than usual, and underneath was a white bra. She flirts openly with the man. And by the time lunch was over, she felt like there was a bit of the old Ian in him. He spent most of lunch staring at my blouse. At some point, he reached out and grabbed my shoulder. Yeah, he'll be the old Ian again soon, Callie told the other women over lunch a few days later. I think not earlier than in a month. Men are actually very simple. Joni laughed. Show off your boobs. Maybe let me look under your skirt. Show more of your legs. Anything is better than going to the doctor for something that's bothering them. All four women smiled and nodded. This time, Ian invited Kelly to lunch the following Tuesday. She was wearing a tight, dark green silk dress, and when she left for lunch, 2 extra buttons were undone at the top, and 2 more at the bottom. The dark green frilly bra was clearly visible, as were the tops of her stockings when tilted at just the right angle. Oh, you look sexy, baby, Elvira said quietly as Callie passed her desk on the way to the elevator. Callie winked at her as she walked past, followed by Ian. Elvira smiled as Ian reached out and gently patted Collie's bottom as he followed her into the elevator. She smiled at him. The following week, Ian invited Callie to lunch again and then to dinner. The following Thursday, as Callie left for work, she carried her overnight bag and a bag of cloth into the car. Her husband always left for work before her, and she knew she could hide the cloth is in the trunk of her car until a more convenient time to bring them into the house. She thought about her husband for the first time, planning to help her boss overcome grief and depression. Callie had no doubt that she treasured her husband Kenny. He is her soulmate, a wonderful husband and father. They met as freshmen at Arizona State University and married a year after graduation. Kenny is a certified public accountant and earns a good living. Together with him, Callie raises 2 children, goes on vacation, and plans to grow old together in due time. Callie knew that Kenny trusted her completely, and that would play a huge role in her plan to help Ian. Kenny wouldn't stick his nose where he shouldn't, and Callie knows she's smart enough to keep her relationship with Ian separate from her life with her husband. Ian knew that Callie was married, and therefore he had to invite her to a restaurant located in the distance. In his corner of the world, there are more than enough establishments that cater to people of his income level who want to maintain confidentiality. They had a very nice dinner and had a great conversation. Back at his game, Ian was handsome and charming, both chivalrous and slightly naughty. and Collie knew for sure that her boss was leading her to his bedroom. She willingly followed him. Ian looks just as fit without clothes as he does in them, especially for a 60-year-old man, Collie thought. He seemed to appreciate her choice of black corset and matching panties. As he slowly and sensually undressed her, Ian warned Collie that he probably wouldn't last long. The first time since he and his late wife hadn't had sex in a while, but he'd taken the little blue pill so he'd be good for a couple of rounds. They exchanged kisses and hugs for about 30 more minutes, after which they made passionate love. For 10 minutes, Collie lay on top of Ian, burying her face in his shoulder and cooing with pleasure. "That was amazing, Ian," she purred. "I wouldn't mind spending a few more evenings here." "Or maybe in another place," he asked tenderly. "Maybe in another way, if it can be arranged." She answered confidently. Collie took a shower and changed into the clothes she wears to work. She told her husband that she would work late and be home by 9, and at least she was right. About the time, Kenny ordered pizza for dinner. A box with a few leftover pieces was sitting in the kitchen, and Kenny was sitting in the living room drinking his 4th beer of the evening when Collie came into the house. She walked up to Kenny and quickly kissed him on the lips. "Did you eat? I left you some pieces," Kenny said. "I placed an order at Orzo's." "I had Greek salad," Collie answered. "Yes, thank you for brushing your teeth." "You know how much I hate the taste of feta," he said. "You're welcome," she replied, turning away and rolling her eyes. In addition to showering with Ian, Collie also brushed her teeth, although she was sure that her husband would never be able to taste the remnants of sperm in her mouth. Collie went upstairs to change into some comfortable loungewear. She went downstairs and took her usual place on the couch opposite Kenny's folding chair. As she sat and watched some anonymous NBA game, she admitted to herself that she had really enjoyed her evening with Ian and didn't feel the least bit guilty. She did not love her husband less and did not take anything away from him, she concluded. Throughout the week, Ian and Collie alternated long lunches and dinners, changing the days of the week for each time. Every meal ended with sex, once at lunch and twice at dinner, as far as Collie and her 3 accomplices could understand. No one else had any idea what was happening. Collie didn't have to go on business trips often, but when the need arose, Ian went with her, although she forgot to tell Kenny about that little detail. After hiding from prying eyes for 5 days, the couple could by all accounts become husband and wife, and in fact, that's how they were checked into the hotel that Ian had chosen. In fact, the trip lasted a couple of days longer than necessary. Ian and Collie spent these 2 days enjoying Miami and each other. Among the activities the couple indulged in was a day on a boat, naked and with sex. Collie was initially reluctant when Ian began to remove her swimsuit as there were other boats nearby, but Ian quickly changed her mind by starting to kiss her. Soon her tight bikini was on the deck of the boat, and a few minutes later, Collie was leaning back on the seat cushions, wrapping her legs around Ian's torso. While they were making love, 2 more boats passed by, beeping in approval of their actions. Collie blushed and giggled when she opened her eyes to see Ian waving back as he continued making love. "I hope we don't run into these people in the restaurant tonight. I could die of embarrassment," she said. On 2 subsequent trips, Collie learned that Ian liked to have sex in somewhat risque places. He took her into the fitting room of an expensive boutique in Boston, noting that he had done the same with his late wife several years earlier. The saleswoman winked at Collie as she completed her purchase, and Collie wore the dress to dinner that evening, but left it with Ian at the end of the trip. She found Ian's rough playfulness charming, and her feelings for him continued to grow. Although she didn't want to admit it to herself, her mission of compassion had long since ended. "You're not thinking of leaving Kenny, are you?" Joni asked bluntly when a group of 4 women were having lunch a couple of months later. "It's obvious that the boss has returned to his senses, but there seems to be something between you." Collie hadn't really voiced the fact that her relationship with Ian had become anything more than compassionate. It seemed to her that if she didn't talk about it, then she wasn't cheating. But even if she did, she still didn't feel like her actions had any impact on her marriage. Of course, I'm not going to leave Kenny, she said seriously as the other three women listened attentively. But Ian, well, Kali never called her relationship with Ian an affair, not with other women or with herself. She constantly called it a relationship. She believed that an affair was nothing more than vulgar sex and that what she had with Ian was something more, although it did not reach the level of love for her husband. After several months of dating Ian, Kali refused him nothing. How long their relationship would have lasted is anyone's guess, but just over a year into the relationship, circumstances took over when the director heading Deloitte and Touche's Charlotte, North Carolina office suffered a heart attack, and the powers that be decided that Kenny Richardson deserves to be promoted to this position. Kenny was happy with the promotion, although the short notice created a bit of a problem for Kali and him. Kali was able to work at her firm's office in Charlotte, but she had to stay another month until life in Phoenix got better for the Richardsons. Deloitte bought the Richardsons' house immediately, but it took time to replace utilities, store, furniture, and other usual chores. Kali didn't really want to move, but she knew that Kenny's promotion was a big career move with serious consequences for their salary and life. She had no choice but to agree, especially since she could work in Charlotte. When Kenny left for Charlotte, Kali was able to make sure her last month with Ian was special, which she did by practically moving in with him. By the time Kali left for Charlotte, there was very little left undone. Sexually between her and Ian, it didn't take long for Kali to figure out that she could visit Ian once a year, telling her trusting husband that she was going to Phoenix to stay with her best friend, Joni, for a week. Clueless Kenny, as Kali came to call him, readily agreed. Joni and her husband Stan met Kali and Kenny at the airport. Kenny noticed Joni raise her eyebrows at his wife before they hugged. He did not see the reciprocal expression on his wife's face. Joni turned to Kenny and hugged him as it seemed to the man insensually. Kenny and Stan shook hands. "Long time no see, bro. How are you?" asked Stan. Kenny gave an evasive answer. He had already dated Kali's close friends and their husbands several times before he and Kali moved in, and he always felt uncomfortable when those couples got together. "What a fine fellow you are," said Joni, "for coming all this way to support your wife. Have you met Ian how many? Several times. At Christmas parties and maybe barbecues. This is what you do for the sake of your spouse, isn't it?" Kenny said, picking up on Joni's negative vibes. Joni and Stan took the couple to a restaurant where they were joined by two more of Kali's friends and their husbands. Upon seeing Kali's husband, both Chandra and Elvira expressed surprise. Kenny even glanced down to make sure his fly was zipped or that he hadn't spilled anything on his clothes earlier in the day. Over food and drinks, conversation between the couples flowed fairly easily, although Kenny noticed that he occasionally caught silent glances from the women. After finishing their meal, Joni and Stan took Kali and Kenny to the hotel and told them they would pick them up the next day to take them to say goodbye to the body. Tomorrow at the funeral home. You'll probably remember some of the old gang, but it's been a while. I understand if you don't want to go tomorrow and just do your own thing, maybe rent some clubs and play golf with some of your old friends, Kali said. No, like I said, I came here for you, Kenny said with an exasperated sigh. Ian Ross was a big man in Phoenix for many years and had many business contacts and friends. There was a long line at the funeral home as they said goodbye to the body. Kenny guessed that the three people in front of the coffin, a man, a woman, and a child, were most likely Ian's daughter with her husband and son. He had never met Ian's daughter and doubted that his wife knew her well either. She never talked about it at all in all her years. At Phoenix General Insurance, Kenny was incredibly surprised when Ian's daughter flushed and ran into Kali's arms, noticing the woman as Kali's group approached the family. Both women hugged each other tightly and buried their heads in each other's hair. "I didn't think you'd come," the woman cried into Kali's ear, and Kenny heard his wife's quiet whisper, "SHH, not now." A woman in her 40s backed away from Kali, eyebrows raised, then quickly looked down and cleared her throat before looking up again. "Jackie, this is my husband Kenny. Come with me. To keep me company on the trip and to pay my respects to your father." They met several times over the years that I worked in Phoenix. "Thank you for coming," the woman said hesitantly, after which she extended her hand and introduced her husband and son. Kenny shook her hand carefully, trying not to squeeze it as hard as he usually did. He offered his condolences and shook hands with the man and the boy while Collie and Jackie chatted calmly for a few minutes. After the funeral, Jackie invited them, along with the other three couples, to her father's house for sandwiches and salads. "I didn't know you were that close in the past, but judging by the way she greeted you, you know her well," Kenny said to his wife as he, Joni, and Stan returned to the car. "Over the years we have met several times. There was nothing else. She was a good child. About 10 years older than the two of us," Collie said, quickly turning to the window to end the conversation. After the funeral and burial, about 25 people gathered at Ian Ross's house, eating sandwiches and enjoying soft drinks. Collie and her three companions were in the kitchen, setting out food. Kenny was leaning against the doorway, quietly sipping a Crown Royal, when he heard Elvira ask if there was a tray of pickles and olives. "Second cabinet to the right of the sink," Collie answered, laying out 2 types of sandwich bread. Kenny tried his best not to choke on his Canadian whiskey as he turned and quietly walked out of the room, unnoticed by the women. He may be ignorant, but he is certainly not stupid. His wife could only know where the tray of pickles was kept for one reason. Suddenly feeling nauseous, Kenny walked out into the backyard of the house, practically staggering. Stan found him there 20 minutes later. "Are you okay, buddy? You don't look well," Stan said and took a sip of the beer he was holding in his hand. "Yeah, I'm fine," Kenny answered quietly. "By the way, I want to thank you for all the times you let Collie stay with you when she came to visit," Stan said before realizing that he had been tricked. "No problem. She never caused any trouble. She's good at this," Kenny said with a wry smile. Suddenly, I wanted to drink more. At some point after lunch, Jackie took Collie by the elbow and led her to her late father's office. Left alone, the younger woman hugged the older one. "I'm so glad to see you, Collie." "So glad you came," Jackie chirped. "Dad would be so glad you came. I just didn't expect to see your husband with you. He doesn't know yet, right?" "No, he doesn't," Collie answered. "I did everything to keep him at home. But he insisted that he needed to go with me. Men, you have to love them because you can't kill them." Both women laughed heartily. "I know that your husband will never understand this, but you helped Dad a lot after Mom died. He was lost. And then you had such a good time together for many years," Jackie said. "I understand that you had to leave with Kenny, but Dad misses you very much. After you left, he never had a permanent woman. He lived for the weeks when you came home. Those have always been great weeks," Collie said sadly. No one noticed that Kenny was silent on the way to the hotel. And then the next morning when Joni and Stan took Kenny and Kelly to breakfast before their flight back to Charlotte. In fact, Collie simply didn't notice that her husband had changed in any way. Until the plane was halfway home. "You're kind of quiet. Everything is fine?" she asked. "Not even close to being okay, but I'm sure you don't want to find out about that. Somewhere over Oklahoma, do you?" Collie blushed deeply and turned away from her husband. As her mind began to process possible answers, she soon realized that answers would have to wait until she got home. They got into their car before Collie tried to find out exactly what her husband knew. "I don't know what Stan told you, but it's not true," Collie said. "Stan didn't tell me anything." "You did it," Kenny said. What are you talking about?" the woman exclaimed, showing genuine confusion and more than a hint of anger. "You and your friends were in Ross's kitchen, preparing food when someone asked where the tray of pickles was, and you didn't even hesitate. It's hardly a wild coincidence, baby," Kenny growled. "I may be ignorant, but I'm not a fool. So later, when I thanked Stan for putting up with you during your visits, he didn't know what I was talking about, even though he did a pretty good job of bluffing for you. So the only question is, how long did this affair last until we moved and it turned into a week-long free pass for you?" For the last 10 years, Kenny was busy keeping his eyes on the road, so he didn't notice the sour expression on his wife's face. However, she was a smart woman and quickly joined the fight, so too. Speak. It wasn't an affair, Kenny. I would call it a relationship. It was compassion, baby. 3 months after his wife died, Ian became very ill, and I felt I had to do something to bring him back into the real world. Yes, I had some feelings for him. He was a truly wonderful guy. But it wasn't love like you and I have. Most of all, I tried to show him that he still had something to offer and gave him hugs, closeness, and support, Collie said. What? Well, repeat it, Kenny shouted. You didn't have an affair because you had compassionate sex with him. Was I born yesterday? If you feel sorry for a guy by a damn escort or a golden retriever, by my count, you had fun with him for over a year and then came back and gave him a week of intense sex every year after we moved in. By any calculation other than yours, it turns out that you cheated on me. No, I didn't love him as much as I love you. She screamed. You've been having sex with him for over a year, and she only stopped because we moved, he said. What is this, if not treason? And then you lied to me by spending a week in his bed every year as a married couple. You know where everything is in his house. I'm guessing Joni, Chandra, and Elvira know this, as well as their husbands, and probably Gina's daughter and her family, judging by the way she greeted you when we arrived. It seemed to me that this was too much for a person who was just a bosom friend. Compassion. You weren't very compassionate towards me, your husband, when you were having fun with him, were you? No, everything was wrong, she objected. He needed it so much. He needed someone. He needed me. And I was next to him. I'm proud to have helped him. Even in the darkness of the car, Kenny could feel the smugness oozing from his wife. He knew. He just knew that she thought she was so much smarter than her husband, because she was able to keep her betrayal a secret for so long. Kenny only had to keep his secret for a week. On the second Monday, Callie received divorce papers, and in the evening, when she returned from work, she was found by the bailiff. Kenny, thank you for not giving me the papers at work, but we're not getting a divorce because of what happened 10 years ago. Callie snorted. Oh, so you don't think that these week-long hookups over the past 10 years are considered cheating? Kenny quipped. He's dead, Kenny. Callie said. A couple of days ago, you didn't know anything. I didn't take anything away from you. If you didn't even know about it. Kenny sighed. He had a whole week to think, and he mentally figured out what approach Callie would take. Let me save you some time, Cal. It was just sex. He didn't mean anything to you. I need to forget about this because it's all about my wounded and bruised pride. This is all, he said. Callie lowered her eyes to the floor. I didn't expect Kenny to be so carefree, at least in words. From his eyes, she realized that he was not at all as carefree as he seemed. I'm sorry I hurt you. I didn't want you to know about it, Callie said. He was dead inside, depressed, maybe even suicidal. All this was done in order to get him out of a difficult state after the death of his wife. We met, had lunch, and had dinner. The closer they got, the more he came out of his shell. Sex became a natural extension of our friendship, our closeness to each other. It was compassion, sex, nothing more. An entire year of compassionate sex. I think it's like a novel, secretly having sex for a week. Once a year, I think it's like a novel, Kenny said. It was a mistake, she screamed. No, the mistake could have been a one-time connection. What you had was an affair. A full-fledged novel, he replied. If it weren't for an affair, why did you continue to visit him? Callie's mouth opened and closed twice, but no sound came out. She cleared her throat. Ian was a wonderful person. I believe I helped him. I enjoyed spending time with him. It wasn't just about sex, she said. Wonderful men don't sleep with other people's wives, even if they're depressed. He knew you were married. I could have refused you, Kenny said. How could you even think that what you're doing is acceptable? You were a married woman. What you gave to him, you took away from me. The intimacy you provided him was mine. You promised me, only me, all your intimacy when we got married. You lied to me and broke your oath, but you don't seem to feel any remorse. What did I do to deserve such disrespect? It wasn't disrespectful. I helped him get out of a difficult situation. Callie objected. Well, yes, of course, Kenny spat. You say virtue, and I said treason. Although she didn't expect that she would be caught, she certainly didn't think that Kenny would turn his back on her so much. After all, they had been married for 25 years. Such love, of course, must mean something, she thought, but apparently she was mistaken. Callie quickly found a lawyer who got the judge to order the couple to undergo 12 mandatory marital counseling sessions. She hoped that the presence of the consultant would make Kenny listen to her reasons for helping Ian. Sometimes cuddling and communication are just as important as sex, Callie said at the beginning of the first session after the death of Ian's wife. He needed someone's warmth, and I didn't see anyone who could help him. And then you decided that it should be you, that our marriage had to take the blow so that Ian could heal. You traded our marriage for Ian, Kenny raged. No, it wasn't like that, Callie replied. He was devastated. I was just being a good friend. You are my wife. Comforting a friend by spreading your legs is from my point of view prohibited. You should have refused to like a good wife, he said. This was not part of my plans. But as our relationship developed, it became part of it. I developed feelings for him. Of course, not the ones I feel for you, but feelings of a kind. I couldn't just sleep with him if I didn't care about him. She said, did the others know? How did you get appointed as his healer? Kenny asked at the second consultation. Callie lowered her eyes to the table and picked at her nail. We all talked about it. Non-stop, she explained. I was the closest to him, so it seemed like it was my responsibility. The others had to cover for me so that no one else knew what was happening. It was better for me. Ian and company. So simple, Kenny said, shaking his head slowly, even if it's bad for me. But, again, apparently I don't count. Was I even fourth on this list? I love you. And I always loved it. I love you just as much as the day I married you, Callie said. It's not about you. It's not about you and not about me. It was about what Ian needed, and it was outside of our marriage. This is nonsense. And you know it, Kenny growled, standing up from his chair at the table. You unilaterally stepped outside of our marriage. So of course you're trying to exploit this bullshit now. You put someone else before our marriage. You did not leave everyone else, although you made such an oath to me. But I saved him, she said hesitantly. So what do you mean by all those times you had sex with him after you saved him? How then to understand all these trips to Phoenix? Your relationship, as you call it, was nothing more than an excuse for you to be a slut. He accused. I was not a libertine, Callie exclaimed. Why don't you see this? It wasn't about sex. He is just a small part of it all. But everything was wrong. The sex and everything else. Kenny said, you've been cheating on me for over a year. Over 10 years, actually. It's over between us, Cal. Kenny nodded to the consultant and left the room. Mrs. Richardson, regardless of your motives, practically meets the definition of emotional and sexual infidelity. And your husband has made it abundantly clear that he will never agree with your point of view. I'm afraid I'll have to stop these sessions, the consultant said. How could you just leave me after 25 years? Callie shouted at her husband when he returned from work at the end of the working day. Does our history, our love for each other mean nothing to you? I could ask you the same questions if I knew you were cheating on me with that bastard. Kenny shouted back. Does your love for me really mean so little to you that you can cheat on me so easily? And there is no need to say that this is not treason. If you had some kind of intimate relationship with him, then this is treason. The couple's 2 children were unhappy with their parents. Both said they understood their father's point of view, but daughter Molly repeatedly tried to convince him to take her mother's side, until one FaceTime conversation saw Kenny ask his son-in-law if he agreed with his wife doing what she did. Callie, Molly, and Daniel didn't really discuss Callie's cheating, believing the other would support their feelings. "No way," Dad said, the son-in-law. "If my wife tries this with another man in a second, her ass will be out of this house," Daniel Molly exclaimed in shock. "What Molly?" he answered. "Even before the wedding we discussed infidelity, emotional and otherwise. She cheated, Mall, end of story. And you do this shit, and every time you defend what she did to your father, I worry about it, Molly." "No, Daniel, I would never do that to you," Molly said. "Yes, and your father also never thought that your mother could do something like that to him," Daniel said. The couple's son, Jerry, did not hide the fact that he was upset with his mother. The first thing he did after Kenny told him about the divorce was call his mother and swear at her for several long minutes. "Damn it, Mom. How could you do this to Dad and to us? You're destroying the family," Jerry said. "It's not like your father said." Callie tried to object. "It's not just about sex. I hope it's someone, whether you helped someone or not. You slept with someone other than Dad." Jerry asked it. Jerry noted to himself how loud the silence on the phone was getting. It lasted several seconds before he heard his mother hang up. Kenny and Callie continued to live in their home together, but slept in separate bedrooms, and the divorce slowly moved forward. Callie and her lawyer questioned everything to slow down the process. She was confident that eventually her husband would see things from her point of view, or at least love her enough to see things from her point of view, and they would continue to live as a married couple. However, over time, Kenny began to communicate with her less and less, and this did not give her peace. "Do you remember how we always talked about how, as we grew older, we would travel the world and find adventures together?" Callie asked one night, as they sat in the living room watching TV. "Are you really going to give up this for a lonely life in a small apartment sitting alone, just because of something that happened 10 years ago and did not affect your life in any way? If you had not found out about this due to my obvious carelessness, we would not have divorced and would still be planning our trips. Why can't you come down to Earth so we can choose option one and grow old together? Why couldn't you think about this before starting an affair? Why should I forget your betrayal and not you not committed?" Kenny asked. A month later, Kenny called Joni. He was surprised by this, but knew she was calling in an attempt to get him to reconsider his decision to divorce her best friend. "She loves you, Kenny. Joni said her relationship with Ian was to help him. He was so depressed. If he really needed help, why didn't you or Chandra or Elvira help him?" "Why, Callie?" he asked. "Damn, why didn't he see a therapist?" The silence on the line told Kenny that Joni was trying to come up with an acceptable answer. After a 10-second pause, she finally answered. She was the closest to him. Personally, we all knew this. She stepped in and did what had to be done, Joni said. It was Kenny's turn to go silent as he thought. "Tell me, Joni, would you trust Callie to be alone with Stan for a few days?" he asked quietly. "Certainly, she is my best friend. She would never harass Stan," she replied confidently. "You and she constantly tell me that she loves me, but that didn't stop her from cheating on me. Her husband, if she could cheat on me, why can't she cheat on you or others?" Once again, it was Joni's turn to remain silent. "Damn," she finally muttered. "Thank you for listening." Kenny was amazed that Callie never seemed to understand the depth of her wrongdoing to him, even as she begged her husband to give up the divorce. She continued to insist that what she did for Ian was good and did not affect her marriage to Kenny. "If you hadn't found out, we would still be married. We would still be in the Garden of Eden," she remarked during their last meeting before the divorce. After the divorce, Callie returned to the company office. She lived alone in an apartment, not considering it necessary to spend money on a house. Occasionally, she would get together with her 3 old friends, but she rarely received invitations to spend time with any of them at their home. She never again felt such a connection with her friends as before the move. Before the divorce, she still couldn't understand why Kenny didn't see anything other than cheating in her relationship with Ian. "I didn't take anything away from him. What could it harm?" she often asked her friends. Subscribe to our channel so that your second Chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.